Okay, hello and welcome to the first ever virtual Washington Writers Conference. I'm Margaret Rodenberg, and I'm the author of Finding Napoleon, which just came out this month. And since this is a pitch session, I'll just tell you its quick log line, which is that it's based in part on a romantic novel of love and betrayal that young Napoleon Bonaparte tried to write. So right now I'm going to be I'll be moderating this evening's panel called Pitch Perfect. And I do want everybody to know that it is being recorded. Before I introduce tonight's panelists, I'd like to go over some meeting reminders. First, we ask that all of you remain muted throughout tonight's panel. Ask any questions you have by typing them into the chat session, and I'll be pulling from those throughout the evening. So just type them in as soon as you think of them. Don't wait for a time when we're going to ask for Q&A. As we noted on Tuesday, if you were there, we know that everyone is eager to get their pitch schedules, and we're working really hard to make sure we have those set. We hope to send them out to you sometime next week. But with that, let's get on to tonight's panel. And I'm going to start by introducing the agents. Irene Goodman of Irene Goodman Literary Agency represents high-end adult fiction, but not fantasy or science fiction, and nonfiction in specific areas such as health, business, France, cooking, and Judaica. I really liked, Irene, that on your website, it said that you do your representation with a tremendous amount of joy. That brought joy to my heart, as a matter of fact. Sam Hiyate of the Rights Factory represents adult and YA fiction and nonfiction. You and your agency have broad interests that include YA, graphic novels, memoirs, thrillers, women's fiction, and book to TV and film adaptation. Everything, it seems, except picture books. And also, our pitchers for this evening and for later should know that he doesn't like stories with sad endings. At least that's what he says. So I don't know if we've got yet, if Jennie Dunham from Dunham Literary has arrived yet. She was running a little, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay, great. Great. Okay.
Us to the top.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you then too, that you represent adult literary fiction and nonfiction, children's books from picture books through young adult. First and foremost, she's interested in a strong story, memorable characters, unusual premises, and what I liked also is heart and heartbreak. And she also was going to want to know what's new and fresh about your project. So all of these folks manage their own agencies. And while two out of three of them were with us on Tuesday night, were not with us on Tuesday night, most of our audience, we think, were here on Tuesday's panel. So with that in mind, we're going to try not to overlap too many of the questions with issues that were addressed on Tuesday. But if you think we've left something out, please put it in the Q&A, and that'll give us a little reminder that maybe we need to go back to basics. So what we're going to do is we're going to this evening, because it's about pitches, and Tuesdays concentrated on queries, we're going to start by asking the agents if they see much difference between those two. So Sam, on Tuesday, the classic query letter was described as a 3-paragraph format representing the hook, the book, and the cook. So a pithy sentence or two, the book more about the plot or content, and the cook about the person who wrote it. So, and why is this the best person to be writing that book? So the question is, do you see much difference between a query letter described like that and what an in-person pitch is? And please unmute yourself. Good, thank you.
Yeah, so it's a good question. the advantage of an in-person pitch is I have a better sense of who I'm dealing with, and probably the most important thing is whether they're crazy or not. I know that I mean, I don't think I'm even allowed to say that technically, so I have to be careful. I know I'm being recorded. I'll probably have the thought police after me for that. But more importantly, it's a question of I'm talking to somebody and I can feel whether, I can feel how excited they are, even though if they're nervous, that could go against them. But I want some excitement, and I want some like joy about their project. And usually, whenever I've signed people at conferences, it's because 80% of it was who they were. And I can give you an example of this. Like there was somebody I met at a conference 2 or 3 years ago, and they were like a death expert, and they taught a course on death. They had a certificate in death. They did all kinds of death related stuff. And I said, you should do a TED Talk. They said, I did. And I looked it up, and 1,500 people watched it. And I said, no, that you failed. You failed with the TED Talk. But then we were talking about them in-house at one of our staff meetings. And then my kids agent said, I think this could be an interesting kind of middle grade, young adult nonfiction book, because kids, they don't have a resource for talking about death when there's death, in the family, or even if it happens with somebody at school or whatever. So we came up with a proposal, and we just were on the verge of having either a small bidding war or one offer. We're not sure about the other person. But this is the kind of thing that happens is somebody presents themselves and you're like, okay, well, you obviously love this and you know your stuff. So what can we do with you? And then in that case, we got it that far. And when I get a pitch in email, I don't really see the person. So I don't really get any of that stuff, that is 80% of some of our communication is like the rest of it, not just what we're seeing on the page, but the person. So that would probably be the big difference. The other thing is, of course, I can ask a lot of questions, even in 5 minutes. I can say, well, tell me about this. What about that? What about this? Whereas with the query, I'm more wary of starting a conversation with somebody unless there's enough there in their pitch in that letter that I could say, there might be something here that I'll look at. Because you started it, Margaret, and I don't want to hog my time, so you can dock me later. But you said I hate sad endings. I just want to tell you guys another story. So
fast.
Yeah, in the last year, I made 2 writers change the endings. One guy had a novel where the guy died, and I'm like, so I'm going to read this whole book, and this guy died. I said no, and then we fixed it. We sold it, and then most recently, this female character died at the end, and I said no. I'm not going to, I have the same argument. I'm not going to read a book where I'm with that character and it's a great novel. And, it has to me, it has to end on hope. There has to be enough to keep them, alive and keep going from whatever they've learned in that story. Anyway, I'll stop there. Thanks so much.
Okay. All right. And is Jennie Dunham there?
Yes, it's Jennie Dunham.
Dunham, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting me.
I really like what Sam said about, people being in person for the pitch and how you can get a sense of who they are. Hang on, my screen is going all over the place, which is very dislocating. Anyway, but what else I could say is that I want to know sort of who you are and why you're the perfect person to write this, which is a different way of coming at Sam's, stance on this, so I'm sorry, I'm very flustered because my screen just changed. Can you change it back? There we go.
There we go.
Sorry. I also want to have a sense when I meet somebody that they know the business enough to know where their book is going to fit on the shelf, what they've written and where it fits in with the books that are already published and what it brings and adds that isn't already there.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a sense of the business itself too.
Okay. And how about you, Irene? Do you see a difference between a query letter and a pitch? And how do you feel if the pitch is memorized or even read to you as opposed to recited to you? How much does that delivery matter to you?
that matters, because I once had somebody holding a piece of paper and her hands were shaking. And I just felt so bad for her. I thought, it's not supposed to be this hard. And I gently took the paper out of her hand and I said, just talk to me. Pretend I'm your next door neighbor and you wrote this thing and you want to tell me about it. But you've got to relax, and you've got to show a little confidence. You've got to believe in yourself, because I can't hand that to you. I understand that people get very nervous and they're not used to doing this. And in some ways, I don't like it at all because it's a very artificial setting. I like better if I'm schmoozing around in the lobby or the bar and start chatting with people. It's more natural. But to answer the original question, my sound is weak. I will try to speak up. The original question is, do I see a difference between a query letter and a vocal pitch? Technically, no, except obviously the personal factor is there when I need to go into audio settings and increase it. Oh God.
Okay, I tell you what, how about Irene, I give you a few moments and we'll move on to another question and I'll come back to you in a
I am
few.
in the country and sometimes my reception is not good.
Right. Hopefully we'll come back to you and
Okay.
without any problem, okay? So let's go on with the content of a pitch. So Jennie, what order do you like to hear a pitch in? Should it start with do you want to set up so that it starts with the title and the genre and the theme, or do you want to get right into the hook? What is your feeling about a pitch?
Well, I don't think it matters exactly what is precisely first or second, but I do want to get a sense of, this is a middle grade fantasy, kind of right away. But I also want to know the hook, because it's the hook that's going to make me think, ooh, I want to read that. I want to know more about that. And it's going to lead me in. So I think that that's really important too, to have in there. And it also needs to be pretty short, because you may be in an elevator or a line for the bathroom. Oh, well, for women, that's not necessarily short, but, so you have to be able to get it across succinctly, and it shouldn't feel rote. It should feel natural, like you're just talking to someone.
Okay. And Sam, how about you? Do you care about the order that you're hearing this in? Because it's a little different than when it's on paper.
Yeah, so I not really. I mean, if somebody's pitching me, I reserve the right to ask them questions, and I want to know, like, it's kind of similar. I had something like what happened to Irene, where somebody was kind of shaking, and I just said, take a deep breath. I wasn't, Irene, I didn't have the courage to take the paper away from them. I just like, take a deep breath, just start from the beginning, and just let's just do this as we're having a conversation. So that was similar. I feel like you should be able to summarize your thing, your project enough. And I think I mentioned this last time, so at the risk of repeating myself slightly, I really believe in market comparables. Like if you say, I'm trying to do this like this person, or I'm trying to fit into this niche or this one, or imagine if Malcolm Gladwell, was writing about this area rather than that one, then I'd say, okay, I kind of get a sense of what you're trying. Even if you're like, even if I'm just getting your ambition with that, you may not be Malcolm Gladwell. In fact, you aren't. But if you're trying for that, and if you've published places and had feature articles, then you could be on that path at some point.
Mm-hmm. And Irene, looks like you're back with us, not frozen anymore. Let's hope we can hear some with you. We know you're off in the Berkshires. So when you hear a pitch, do you want the log line absolutely first, or do you want a setup first that tells something more about the book? I think we're in trouble with Irene.
She just muted.
She wants a family and a husband.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're going to have to, Irene, I'm so sorry, but we're not able to hear you. So Sam, let's ask another question. Do you want to hear up front about the genre? Or is that something that you want to be able to get from the pitch?
No, I don't want to guess the genre. I want to know up front, because then right away I can start thinking about, is this something for me or is this something for one of my agents? And then I'll know the kind of questions to ask for them, because I know their sensibilities. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, for those of you who are here on Tuesday, I take pitches because I get so many, because I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, is I get so many pitches that I'm constantly sending them to other junior agents who are looking to build clients. So I'm often thinking, oh, this might be good for this person, or this might be right for that person. And it happens all the time that somebody will sign something that I found, or somebody came to me and I'm like, try this, and then a month later they're working together. So it all works out.
All of our agents who are here this evening also do nonfiction. I tend to think more fiction because that's what kind of writer I am. But is the pitch different when it's a nonfiction pitch to you? And Jennie, can I ask you to start with that?
Sure. It can be different, but it can be similar. It depends, I think, in large part, if it's practical nonfiction, meaning like a how-to book, or if it's narrative nonfiction, which means it has a story, and that story arc that we find so satisfying as humans in making sense of our world and understanding it through story. But still we're going to be, let's go back to this hook, book, and cook idea, which is just so succinct. Still a lot about the cook. Who is this person? What have they done? What is their experience? What do they bring? What is their take on their subject? That's very important. And then what is this new book and what is it going to tell you? Why should I spend $25 to buy a hardcover and spend, 5 or 6 hours of my life learning about this, either through a narrative or through how-to steps?
Mm-hmm. Irene, you want to give it a try again? And I'll ask you whether or not you find that the pitches have to be different when they are nonfiction than when they're fiction.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Everything tells a story, and that includes nonfiction. Even prescriptive nonfiction in its own way tells a story. So I just want to hear what the story is. And however you want to put that together is fine. But you've got to get it down into a little bubble that is appealing. But ultimately, for me, no matter how you do it, the proof is in the reading. Because we're not, if you sell 10 million books, you're not going to have 10 million people sitting in front of you watching how charming and exciting you are. It has to be there on the page.
Yep. Let's go to once the pitch is over, but you're still sitting there, because in the real world, unlike this evening where our brave volunteers are just going to get 2 minutes to put what's in their hearts out to the rest of us. In the regular conference, you're going to have 6 minutes to talk. So as Sam said, they're going to ask you questions. I know I want to talk about what kinds of questions you as agents might ask the authors. I know one of the more recent times, I think the last time there was a Washington Writers Conference, outside the room, I heard several authors complaining that an agent had asked them what was the tone of their book, and they didn't know what to say. So can you give us some idea of what you might want to ask an author after they've given you the pitch? How about Sam, you start with that.
I'd rather just do it when we're talking, but the tone thing is interesting, because what we're looking for there is, you could have a very serious treatment of something, or you could have a really funny treatment of the same thing. And some people like me prefer the funny version. Like I did a book where the title was called Healthy as Fuck, and everybody loved it, whereas I would take that on. some other people might say, you know, I'm not going to take this book on because it's got the wrong tone. So tone is really important. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there.
Okay. Irene, what kinds of questions do you end up asking people after they've given you the pitch?
Well, these are just a few examples. It could be anything. I'm a stickler for settings, so I might very well ask, where is the set, and is the flavor of that place part of the book? I think that enhances and enriches a story tremendously, and if you don't use it, it's a wasted opportunity. So I might ask that. Another thing is, say you wrote a legal thriller, I'd say, are you a lawyer? It's going to have an easier time if you are a lawyer and you know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Jennie, is there anything that you ask the authors that the authors seem to be surprised at being asked that they don't have an answer for?
You know, if they know their book well, they're not usually surprised. And think about it. Anyone who writes a book is the world's leading expert on what they've written. So they pretty much know what that is, I find. My questions are more delving into the project. You know, I usually start with character. I like very character-driven writing. So I'll say, well, what inspired the character to do that, or motivated him, or what are the character's biggest fears, or what was the character hoping for, you know, but it will all be based on what I'm hearing in the pitch, you know. So we're all sort of struggling a little bit with how to answer that, because it moves and changes depending on what we're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
I'm going to go to a question that we have from our audience that's kind of interesting, which is there any move towards visual pitches versus email to agents? Irene, how would you feel about that?
Well, I have a particular email that is used for that purpose, and I rarely look at it. I hire someone to do that for me. She's very, very good, and she finds anything that I might actually want to look at. So I don't know. I don't think it's something I would want to do, because I'm just so busy to have to stop whatever I'm doing, and then I have to get on this, do this Zoom thing now. I'd probably, I can't do it now. You know, I'm just busy. But if Natalie did it, she would feel like it's part of her job, and she might be very excited to do it. So I think for me, that would be a better option.
Okay. Jennie, do you have any feeling about that?
Yeah, I do. I think of a virtual pitch as very similar to a pitch on the phone, and people want to try to make that personal connection. All of us do. But I see virtual pitches as very similar to pitches in person at conferences. And I think that that's a replacement that I'm seeing, and I haven't seen any movement to replace email pitches.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Alexa, I'm just going to give you warning right now that in about 3 minutes, I'm going to call on you to give a pitch. Okay. So just so you're aware, I'll let you know in a couple of minutes. Okay. Sam, would you like to go into a change for the way in which the authors try to reach out to you and tell you about their books? Would you be interested in setting up times at your office where there are virtual pitches from authors?
You know, I wish I had time to do that, but I'd rather kind of sort through them in my email quickly and look for, you know, something interesting and forward it to somebody or not. But most of my time speaking is for editors or my clients, and I feel like that's a premium, but because I only have so many hours that I can talk before I get hoarse every day. So, and I'm pitching a lot. You know, it's important that once I have clients, that I get them out to editors that are going to buy their books. So I'd rather use my charms that way.
Okay, so I'm going to take one more question from the audience. That is a question that I hear all the time from authors, particularly when they're about to pitch. And we're going to try to do this pretty quickly so that we can then get to Alexa's pitch for itself. which is that if your story has elements of several genres, for example, a historical mystery that deals with romance between two characters, how do you decide which is the right genre? So Irene, do you want to tackle that one?
I usually encounter that situation with a certain amount of dread, because you really have to pick one section of the bookstore that it goes in, because that's what the publisher does. They're not going to do it for you. You have to know what you're doing. So if it's historical fiction, then that's what it is. If it's a mystery, you could have a history mystery. That's fine. If it's a romance novel, then that's what it is. But each one of those would be shelved in a different place. You've got to pick the place. And
Okay.
I would advise you to pick the place that your book has the most of, but also the one that is selling best at the moment.
Okay. Jennie, do you have any different take on that question?
My response is very similar. You really need to know what you've written and be writing in one area, because book buyers for stores can only buy the book and put it in one section. They can't put it in both memoir and somewhere else too. It can't be a mix. And because bookstores can only do that, that's what publishers want, which is what we're looking for in doing that. And I guess what I would say, I mean, I don't work with genre too much, but think about who you are as a writer long term. What do you read a lot of in your free time? Who are you as a reader? Because that's likely to influence who you are as a writer, and what area you know the best, and what you want to keep doing so you can build a career in that area.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. I'm going to skip on. I think those answers are pretty similar. I don't know, Sam, if you have something to add to it, or should we move on from that question?
Yeah, let's move on. I think they covered it perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to have Alexa. If you unmute yourself, I see you have. If you would like to give us your pitch, and we ask you to stay just within our, we're going to try to do 2 minutes, maybe a little over, but I'm going to cut you off if we go too far over. Okay. And then I'm going to ask the agents to answer what their feeling is one by one. But we're going to, again, as I said, we'll try to keep it pretty succinct. Okay. So thank you very much. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you. What if you were searching for your missing aunt and found her obituary instead? Ever since I was little, my mother told stories about being orphaned, then about losing her only family, her older sister, on the last day of World War II. I grew up with this phantom aunt who held all the answers to my mom's mysterious childhood, and all I wanted was to find her so I could fix my mom. But I was born deaf, and later I came out as queer. Then all my mom wanted was to fix me. Her unreliable memories are fragments, victims to the chaos of a wartime childhood. She doesn't remember her mother's name. She barely knows her own. The only way to honor her story is to acknowledge parts that can never be known. 3 escaped zoo monkeys, a crow protector, and a loyal dog helped me bear witness to my mother's tangled memories and weave her origin story. Existence is a slipstream fairy tale, braided from memoir and biography with nods to fantastical realism, and runs at about 65,000 words. It starts in Manchuria, China, and goes through Kharkiv, Ukraine, where my school-age mom finds herself squeezed between Stalin's murderous rampages and Hitler's advances on Russia. Clad in a black silk dress and green kid leather pumps, her sister engineers an escape by liaising with Wehrmacht officers. For the next 2 years, they walk through Europe stateless until they are separated at the German border. From there, my mother alternates between being homeless in the forest and being taken in by predatory do-gooders, being in an orphanage and being adopted. And each time, like a rescue pet, she is renamed and rebranded until she has little memory of who she was. Is she German, Ukrainian, Russian, Chinese? What was her name? Her last adoption, this time to an American family, includes ship's passage, which is miraculously upgraded to a flight, finally a win, only to miss her sister on the original ship, the same passage. Her story continues to DC, where I grew up, My mother rejects my identities and we become estranged until randomly I find her sister's obituary in nearby Toronto. Gingerly reunited, my mother and I traveled to Kharkiv, her first homegoing in 75 years. There, when she confirms her own existence, the question becomes, can she accept me? Genre-wise, it's innovative memoir. Susan Faludi in The Dark Room meets Carmen Maria Machado in The Dream House. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. Okay, Sam, I'm going to ask you if you would respond first. Would you do that? You're muted, Dar.
Yeah, correct. So that is a very strong pitch because I have, from the brief minutes that you described it, I have a very good sense of it, like the scope of it, the journey, the nature of the conflict. I guess there are so many stories about people and the relationships they have with their mothers and where that goes. And I feel like your comps were good. I don't know that it would work for me personally because that kind of story isn't, it's something that I sometimes have a hard time engaging in. But I think there's at least one agent at our agency that might be interested in it. But I also know that there are other agents that are actively looking for, GBLTQ stories. And like, there's definitely, I think you're kind of on trend. You're kind of in that moment where everybody's going to say, this could be an interesting story. Nobody's told this story before. So now is the time. And I feel like I don't know how many people you've queried, but I feel like you get some response to that because, the kind of mother-daughter thing is perennial. That angle is always going to work. It's the story of a relationship. And this has so many complexities that I think it's quite interesting. So, I mean, I would say I would look at that or get somebody at my agency to look at it.
Great. Irene, what do you have to say about that?
I liked it. I thought it was a very well put together pitch. Clearly, you put a lot of work into this, and I really appreciate that because it shows respect for you, for me, and for your work. Just a small pet peeve of mine. Don't start with a question. What would you do if? Just tell me the story. There's a lot of depth there. There's a lot going on there. I would probably ask to see 3 chapters of this and then see how much I like those. I did feel like, did you memorize this pitch? I wish that you had used note cards instead so that it would sound a little more spontaneous. And it's okay if you end up running off on some other idea. It's okay, at least for me. I don't know if was there a specific length to these pitches that they had to do? Because I felt like it was a little too long. If it had been half the length, I still would have had the same reaction. And very nice that you included comps. That is so important. Publishers do that all the time. They won't publish it if they can't find a decent comp because they're afraid that, well, if it's never been done, that's because nobody wants it, which may not be true, but that's what they often think.
Great. Thank you, Irene. And Jennie, what is your reaction?
I think those are both good responses from Sam and Irene. And I would add to it that as I listened, I thought to myself, this is a really ambitious work. This could be very trendy, as Sam said, because of the LGBTQA aspects of it. I wanted to know more about the through line of it because I felt there was a lot of going into the mom. And I wondered if, we weren't hearing more about you and your story, and it needs to be your story. And I wondered, wait, did I miss that? Is this not memoir? This sounds like memoir. I wasn't sure about that. Also, because it is about a mother and a daughter and that really primal relationship that so many people can relate to, how is it different? What makes yours stand out? And you started about the aunt. So there's something in there about finding the aunt and the obituary that is the key to this. And I wonder if maybe that's a lesser element that's sort of a surprise twist in the story at the end. I'm not sure. So maybe that's not the place to start in your pitch, but not having seen it, I can't say for sure. You know, and you mentioned at one point that there were parts that were magical realism almost. Do I remember that correctly? And I wondered if that fit in this story. So that made me think, well, maybe this is a little all over the place. You know, does she have her solid, you know, angle of where she's writing this book? I'm not sure. It does sound interesting. It sounds like you have a lot to say, really rich in terms of time, but ambitious, really ambitious. And to be successful, you have to pull those together. So.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexis. Good job. Okay, so since we've been talking a little bit about comps, I have a couple questions about them. They're really a difficult thing for all of us, I think, to do, for writers to do. I don't know if they're as hard for agents to do. We have one question on that from the audience. And what they've said is that you're caught between two impulses. Is my book just like these 5 other books? Is my book so niche it won't sell? How do you pick these comps? So that's a pretty broad question, but I think it goes to the fact that they really are hard for authors to come up with. So could I get Irene? Maybe you could start with talking about the process. What should an author be thinking about when they're picking comps?
Okay, you want your book to fit, to have a place on an already crowded shelf. It needs to belong on that shelf, meaning it fits in with those other books, and yet it must also be different from them in some way. And what you want to do is cite all those comps and then say how yours is different. That's the key, because there's really nothing new under the sun. Most things have already been done by the ancient Greeks, if you want to really get into it. But it's your job to make yourself stand out just a little bit. Why do we need another one of these? Well, here's why.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you should know what some of your comps are. If you're writing in that field, then you shouldn't be totally ignorant of what else is out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Jennie, do you have any feeling about that?
Yes, I think it goes back to what I said about where do you read the most? You should know that area. Another few guidelines that I like to give is you want the books that you pick to be easily recognizable to agents and editors. So they need to be successful, either selling well or have critical success or win awards. And you need them to be fairly recent. You can't say, you know, mention a book that's 20 years old. You need to have it be within the last 5 years or so that the comps relate to the current marketplace. Although, I mean, it's arguable that in this last year with COVID-19 during the pandemic, there's nothing that's really, you know, the current trend, but we will come out of that, and you know, you can sort of see and try to pick ones that are in that bridge as we move forward. And let me see, I think I had one. Oh, most people like to hear at least one book, but if you have something that's not a book that's relevant, that gives that extra spin, it could be a movie or a game or something like that, you can use that as your part of your comp as well. But I would recommend that you have at least 1 or 2 comp books.
Mm-hmm. Irene, did you have something you wanted to add there? Cheddar.
Well, I think Jennie covered it, and very well. I just want to say, don't pick a comp. You want to show how you will fit into a group of successful books. And here's another one to join that marvelous, successful group.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sam, did you want to add something about comps? I know you like comps that just as Jennie said, involve something more than just books.
Yeah. And my most successful one in the last year was, so get this, Sons of Anarchy, which is a TV show, which I love. It's a great show about a motorcycle gang, which is over now, but Sons of Anarchy meets Lana Del Rey. And Lana Del Rey has a 10-minute video called Ride about where she's at the back of a motorcycle in this gang. And so the story is a girl who is like in the gang. She's like that Lana Del Rey like character who's like maybe a teenager, and everybody else, they look like big burly guys that are like in their 50s. It's like, what is this person doing in that story? And so I started reading this story and I'm like, wow, this is a perfect comp, because if you know Ride and you know Sons of Anarchy, you're going to understand where the story fits in. But it's actually a new area, because girls in motorcycle gangs only started to become a thing when the show Sons of Anarchy came about, and I started to look it up and did the research. So, Irene was saying there's nothing new under the sun. Well, there really isn't in a general sense, but specifically there are trends and things that come up, and the idea that you could have a romance told this way only became real because of a TV show. That there's now, when I did the Googling and the research on Publishers Marketplace, there's like 4 or 5 series about these books. One of them has 21 books in the series with different women in motorcycle gangs. I'm like, wow, who knew this was a thing? But it's a thing. And so I have this book that I'm going to try to explain, except mine is more upmarket. And the thing about comparables that is really important is that it helps you, it helps us, it helps the publishers, it helps everybody identify where that book fits into the market, because there are genre books, there are literary books, there are books that try to be really kind of sophisticated, and there are books that are very poorly written but have brilliant stories. So there's so much variety. Like Irene was saying, you have like 10 million books that are already in print. So how are you going to stand out from that? So you want to say, it's like, compare it to what's already out there, so we have a sense that it's of like, we're comfortable knowing that it's not something so bizarrely different that we're not going to know what it is. So we have a level of comfort. It's like when you watch a trailer, they tell you almost all of the story because they know that you need to feel that comfortable going in, but they don't, the ones that ruin it tell you the ending. Then you're like, why am I going to watch the movie? But anyway, so you want to feel comfortable that this book is going to give you an experience that is going to be familiar and yet a little bit new. It's going to be a different, feeling slightly, because it's going to have a different tone. And that's why the tone question comes in. It's going to be funny or sad, or so, it's got to have a little twist. Otherwise it's going to be the same as some other book. And that's what you're trying to avoid.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Martin, I'm going to give you right now your 3-minute warning. So we'll do another quick question and then we'll have you come on. Okay. So I'm going to try to give us something that maybe would be a little quicker than some of our other answers. So when you have come to a meeting like this, a conference like this, do you think differently about the query or the pitch that you're getting than if something just comes over the transom to you? Do you give it any more attention? And Jennie, I'm going to ask you that first.
Sure. I think making a personal connection is always important. And if I can remember, oh yeah, I remember talking to that person, I have that spark of, let me see what this is. That sounded interesting. And so yes, I think that going to conferences and doing pitch meetings and attending workshops can be a really great step. We receive so many queries, and most of our business day is, as you heard from all of us, is not spent reading queries, it's doing business. So, I think that anything that you can do to make that connection is really helpful. And yeah.
Okay, great. Great. Do either of you have something to add to that? Nope. Okay. All right. So in that case, if you're ready, Martin, I'm going to go ahead and let you go ahead and give us your pitch.
Great. Good evening, and thank you to the panel and the Washington Writers Conference for the opportunity to pitch my commercial upmarket novel, The Mentor, which should be of interest to readers of John Grisham's new novel, Sully, which was launched 2 days ago. Michael Nye's All the Castles Burned, and Emily Neiman's The Cactus League. Additionally, the book should appeal to viewers of Steven Soderbergh's film High Flying Bird. When Cal Harris, the hero of The Mentor, was 8 years old, he was orphaned. On the day his mother was buried, he received a used basketball, and the game became the focus of his life. His teams in high school, college, and now the pros became his family. When Cal is injured on the cusp of leading his long, dreadful New York Knicks team to the playoffs, he's sent to Santa Barbara to rehab. There he meets Yvonne Clark and her 17-year-old son, Ladarius Little, and their lives intertwine. As the rehab progresses, Cal is abandoned by the Knicks. He struggles to find purpose within the game, while his relationship with Yvonne and Ladarius deepen. Ultimately, Cal must decide what's truly important to him, the game that was his family or the family he has come to love. While Cal Harris went to the NBA, I wrote, as one of my former clients put it, corporate fiction, as well as coached high school basketball. Over the years, I've coached more than a dozen players who have earned college scholarships to play the game, and 2 have gone on to play professionally. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for their time and consideration, as well as to acknowledge Sam's client, Lee Michael Goldberg, and his novel, The Mentor, which I don't believe is a comp. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. That was great. And so, Sam, since you got a shout out, you're going to have to go first.
It was a good pitch. The only thing that I felt you were missing was you came really close to describing that this choice that has to be made between the game and the family. And I wasn't sure what the complication was that made the family so like if it was all really easy, then everything would be fine. There wouldn't have to be a choice. So to me, there was something about the family that was really urgent that your character had to kind of resolve. So I didn't get that. And it's not that you need to tell us what it is and make it a spoiler. You need to give us a sense of how what the stakes are and how compelling that is for the character, and why it might be a better decision to figure that out at the cost of leaving the team at that moment, because you never know what's going to happen in the future. They usually, in a happy ending, they get to go back and they get the best of both worlds. But while the story's going, we can't always see that part of it. Otherwise, I think it was a good pitch. I got the sense of, I liked your kind of bio at the end where you kind of showed your expertise in both areas. And I wasn't sure what you meant by the term corporate fiction, though. Was that like fiction set in business environments?
I did investor relations, and one of my clients called it corporate fiction.
Oh, got it. So yeah, just like corporate communications.
Yeah.
Totally, I get that. Your spin doctor. Yeah, so I that's kind of my thought. And about The Mentor, we're trying to sell the film rights to it, and somebody just came up with the title The Mentor. So now we're like, oh my God, our book with St. Martin's was called The Mentor, and now somebody has that title, so we're gonna have to figure out another title. Oh well.
Okay, Irene, how did you like the pitch? You got some comments on it?
Yes, first I have to say, I don't know if it's just me or everybody, but when Sam was talking, it was breaking up, at least for me. So I hope I'm not breaking up.
You're doing fine, and we could hear Sam fine at the time. At least I could.
Okay, good. My first question, it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction when I heard John Grisham. I thought, oh, is this a thriller? Okay, I get that it's not my kind of novel. It's just not something I would read. It's a basketball novel. I have never even been to a basketball game in my entire life. As a pitch, I think it was very well done. It's just not for me. And if you were sitting in front of me at a conference, I wouldn't waste any more of your time. I like the length of it a lot. I think that is the right length. And again, I wish that you had used note cards, because when you're reading it, it looks like this. You're doing this and you're reading along, and uh-oh, my screen just went blank. And so
Now I don't know where everyone is, but I hope that you can see me and hear me. If you got all that, that's what it looks like when you're doing that. And now I'm just talking freely, and I think this is better.
Okay. Okay. And Jenny, what have you got to say to that?
So I guess my big question is, what am I reading to find out? You know, we have this setup of this character, and, you know, with an upmarket fiction, I'm expecting it to be fairly pacey, you know, a lot of drive. So I want to be turning pages to find something out. And I think that Sam was getting at why. What I'm trying to figure, you know, what's the complication here? Why isn't this family that he's grown up with when he didn't have one? Why is there any conflict there? You know, so, you know, it's the same thing. But I think with upmarket fiction, I've got to know what the story is. And this sounds, the way you've presented it, I think, a little bit quiet. You know, we sort of plod along and these things happen, and then we're faced with a choice in the climax. And I think we've got to have a much more a much earlier sense of urgency in what we're reading here. I did like your bio, your mini bio. I thought that was good, that you've done the coaching. I actually had written down, who are you? And then you answered who you were. So I was like, okay, that's good. I also felt that your comps were a little too all over the place. And I thought, you know, you would do better with, you know, focusing that to be a little bit more narrow. But anyway, so that's my feedback for you.
Great. Great. Thank you. Good job. Good job. Okay. So that brought up an interesting question, is that a couple of things can happen during a conference when you've pitched. And one thing that can happen is the person says, after you've finished, that's great, but it's not for me. And now you've got 4 minutes left that you could maybe talk to an agent, or maybe let the agent have a break. What are the agent's thoughts on what kind of questions are appropriate at that moment? Or would you prefer that the person just walk away? And Irene, since this started with you saying that, I'm going to ask you to respond. I mean, is it okay if the person says, well, can you give me any feedback on this pitch if it were a book you were interested in? Is there anybody I should talk to? That sort of thing. Or should they just let you have your piece?
Here we go. My screen kept going blank. When that happens, I say, are there any questions you would like to ask me about anything, about the business in general? And quite often they get very shy around that point. And so, you know, if I can get a conversation going, fine, but it's not that important, really, you know. So sometimes I just say, well, thank you very much for stopping by, and I let them go. And what the author should do during that time is get a drink of water, clear your head, do a few jumping jacks, which is what I would do during that time. I mean, literally, I'll get up and do some exercises, something, keep yourself fresh and focused.
Okay, Sam, what do you say to that?
I sometimes, if the person wants to hang out, I'll tell them how to figure out who the best agent might be, especially if we've decided it's not going to be me. So I'll talk about ways of finding the right agent, or maybe looking at other comps that are out there, or if they've got the wrong comps, I'll try to help them figure out what the right comps are if I understand what the project is. So I generally, if somebody's paid for the time to be with me, I would like it to be worth their while, but you know, it's completely up to them. If people want to engage me, I will stay, because I feel sometimes that those things that I'm there to perform, you know, so I try to perform.
Okay. Okay. Jenny, do you have any feeling about that?
I do. So one of the things I would say is what not to do. And that is, sometimes when I say this just isn't for me, people will get very intense and try to convince me that it really is, and I'm just not hearing it the right way. And that is really not a very positive approach, because then I really don't want to work with you. I feel it's very important that you get good advice on your manuscript from someone who gets what you're trying to do and is on board with you. And someone can make some comments and you can reflect on them, but the advice that you want to really follow is the person who says, I get what you're trying to do. I have a couple of suggestions for you. Let's go forward this way. But otherwise, asking about the industry, are there any other random questions that you have? It's so much about taste. Just honor that, because you want to find that person who's a really good match for you. Right, is like we talked about the basketball, and Irene said in the basketball story that she's never been to a game. Well, that's me in football. And I once had a client who wrote a football book, and I read it, and it was so captivating. I'm like, okay, I'm beginning to get football. You've got to do that to me with what you're writing. And if you're not, then I'm not the right person. And what you're hearing here about, use your time wisely and ask questions about the industry, maybe that means you should have like 3 or 4 backup questions that you can ask if you get to that situation. And remember, anytime you go to one of these meetings, you're in a business meeting. And yes, you're probably nervous, but you want to present yourself as, I'm here to find information. When I go to these conferences and I'm doing pitch sessions or critiques, I want to be trying to give as much information as I can to help that person level up, because that's a good thing for everybody. Even if it's not right for me, I want you to end up being the best you can be. So those are my few cents about that.
Yeah, that's very generous. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So in the last year, have you folks been seeing a very big difference in what your editors want to see? Because we're always, as authors, we're always wanting to know what is this mystery that of what the book industry wants, because we recognize that it's not something that we're going to see those books for another couple of years. So when you're looking out right now at what editors are saying to you they want, is there anything you can specifically tell us? Irene, you're nodding your head. Let's go with what you might be thinking.
Right now, everybody wants diversity. It could be people of color, it could be any kind of gender orientation. They don't want plain old boring white people. And if you're a plain old boring white person and you wrote something brilliant, that doesn't mean that they won't look at it. It depends. I mean, in young adult, that is especially the case. I had a lovely novel about a young adult, about a girl who inherits a castle in France. Who wouldn't want to read that? I mean, I just thought it was lovely. And I refused to read it because it had no diversity in it. Actually, I tried to point that out to her, but it was too late. She was, oh, no, we don't do that. Those voices need to be heard. And not only that, but they believe in a concept called own voice teenager. You don't have to be a teenager, but you better be Guatemalan. That's what I want. I want things that are turned on their ear. Like, they don't want plain old history. They want things where you come at it in a whole different way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tall order.
Yep. Jennie, are you seeing anything like that? Are you seeing something different? What is that you're hearing from editors right now?
Own voices, diversity, absolutely. That is a primary. We're trying to make up for not giving enough space to these voices all these years. So yes, that is absolutely what what editors are looking for. And by diversity, we do not mean something like, I'm over 50, it really has to be, you have an authentic, genuine experience or in your culture or heritage or something like that, on the LGBTQA spectrum, or speaking of spectrum, a disability of some sort or a person of color. Something like that is what everyone is looking for right now. And I'm finding that both in children's and adult.
Okay. And Sam, are you seeing anything different?
I think I'm just luckier in that being a person of color, I've always been drawn to various more diversity to begin with. So, I've had successes with all kinds of stories from different voices, and that hasn't changed. I do have, for lack of a better word, I was talking to one of my writers, and he's got to be maybe in his 70s, and he was like a retired law professor, and he's basically a self-proclaimed old white guy. And so he'd written this story about one of Hemingway's wives, and it's so weird because he spent 4 years of his life researching Mary Hemingway, the one that nobody knows about, and he was obsessed with Hemingway. Then he got into this thing, and then I said, I'm going to find somebody to buy this book. And I never gave up on it. And he worked on it for so many years. He did his kind of 10,000 hours. And I'm happy to say that for an old white guy, we're doing well, that there's interest, and there's an offer came through yesterday. And so we're figuring out where it's going to go. But if you have a great story, the thing about, especially in American publishing, is, there are going to be, and I think it's very intense in the middle grade and the young adult markets, but if you're going to be J.K. Rowling or John Grisham or Dan Brown or Stephen King, nobody's going to not publish you now. It's just that you might have to maybe jump an extra hurdle. But if you have a compelling story, there are enough editors to reach, and there are several editors that have made it their brief to say, I'm looking for this. So I happen to have an amazing kind of bad lesbian romance, like a young woman who gets involved with a much older female, who then gets pregnant, and then everything gets complicated because no one knows what's going on. And this girl is like, it's her first love, and she's devastated by everything. But so that's getting a lot of interest right now. So you try to, as an agent, you try to time your submissions with what people want. And I had a book about, if you go to our website, you'll see the guy's face. He's a guy from India who ended up being one of the top Wall Street people of all time, but nobody knew who he was, and I said, how come you never did any interviews, or you never did anything? And so many people rejected the proposal because they said, this guy has an amazing story, but no platform, Sam. And I'm like, but he's brown. He's a brown man. Come on, give him, let's take advantage of this moment. So I try to use that, for fun. I'm like, but people didn't convince anybody. But I finally found a publisher, and there was actually a bidding war in India where it went to like everybody, and we got one of the biggest offers ever, because the Indians are always saying, like, we want to see stories where if you're born here and you accomplish something great somewhere else, we want to celebrate that here, despite the fact that we might all be dying of COVID right now, but we're going to still support this book. So I feel like maybe I was always a little more diverse because of my own background, but I may not be feeling it as much as some other agents. And I feel like a lot of editors still want great stories. So.
Great. So maybe along that same line, I have a question from the audience with someone who says, I'm autistic, so timed in-person pitch sessions are really challenging. Do the agents present recommend being upfront about my autism status at the beginning of the pitch? Jennie, can you give me your take on that one?
Sure. I think if you can weave it in naturally, that's fine. I mean, autism is part of the diversity that everyone is looking for now. So that's actually a plus in pitching and what editors are telling us that they're looking for. One of the clients that my agency represents is someone who's deaf. And so we have different ways of communicating with her, since we don't speak sign language. And when she writes, she says she's actually translating in her mind because she thinks of language visually. So I think you can, say it, but, don't think of it as a negative necessarily, although I understand the challenge you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Irene, do you have anything different to add to that?
I wholeheartedly agree with it. I think you can only be who you are, and it's okay to say who you are. And if you're very nervous about what you're doing because of that, then I think you should say it. And I think you will get respectful sympathy if you say it. I don't mean pity. I just mean, people will understand. And
Sure.
when it comes to diversity, we're all looking for it and everybody wants it. And yes, those voices have not been heard and they should be heard. So the hard part is finding them, finding somebody who has that, but can also write really well. So that's the challenge. I wouldn't see that as a drawback at all.
Okay. Sam, do you have anything to add?
I think they kind of got it. I think that you have to, yeah, they got it. I can't really add anything. That's the right answer.
Okay. Susan, I'm also going to give you a 3-minute warning right now, if you will, that you'll be coming on in 3 minutes. Okay. So one of the other questions that we have is how much does our appearance play into your opinion of us as writers? And in parentheses, this person asks, some of us may be looking a bit scruffier than normal these days due to COVID restrictions / living. Does that make a difference to any of you? Let's just do a yes, no on that. Irene?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes, because I think appearances do matter. Whatever you look like or whatever you choose to wear sends a message, and you get to choose what that message is. So if somebody shows up looking totally schleppy and they look like they just fell out of bed, and the message it sends is, I don't care. I don't have any respect for myself. I don't have any respect for you. I'm not saying you have to be all dolled up or wear a suit and tie, but just wear something decent. You should see my grandson. He looks like Prince Valiant. His hair is down to here. So, it's, just think about it for 5 minutes before you do it. Don't look like you fell out of bed.
Okay. Okay. Sam?
Kind of agree with that in that I feel like normal rules of etiquette, count, like how you would be going into work or going out with somebody or just being involved in any kind of social occasion, especially when there's a professional edge to it, like at a conference. So I feel like, yeah, you, whether or not your hair is perfect, I don't think I care about that. I want to know that you're basically there and you're ready to do the work.
Jennie?
Pretty much the same thing. I mean, I think that you need to be presentable in person. Luckily, being a writer, most of what you do is not in person. But, I have only had COVID haircuts, but just good enough. Neat enough to be respectful and professional, but you don't have to be over the top with it.
Okay. Okay, great. So Susan, we're going to let you go on and give us our third pitch of the evening. We will handle other questions, including from the Q&A, after she's finished and after we've heard from the agents. So stick around to the end with us.
Thanks for this opportunity. I'm Susan Morris Schrader, and my work is called Beyond Brandywine. It's a 100,000-word historical fiction set during the American Revolution. It centers on two main characters. Robin Parker is the daughter of a reluctant rebel. Gillis MacLeod is a Highland Scot who joins the Redcoats as a means of escape. Their journeys take us from a quiet Quaker community to a traditional tobacco farm in the Tidewater, from an island populated only by wild horses and runaways to the Smoky Mountains, and to a number of key Revolutionary War battlefields and sites. As much a coming of age story as a war story, we get to follow Robin as she grows from a rambunctious tomboy into a formidable young woman whose defiance is based more on conviction than on fear. Gillis too transitions from a cynical opportunist that we meet on page 1 into a more honorable man, though still somewhat violent, with a bit of humor and some spice. Beyond Brandywine really speaks to the idea that we seek to belong to something more, to a family, to a clan, to a cause. It also touches on some issues that I think we're still grappling with today. And in this way, I think it would make for some really interesting book club conversations. It's set in the 18th century, but it has like this grittiness to it that I think is more akin to books like The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, or to Janet Fitch's The Revolution of Marina M, and that's because it's based largely on the experiences of my parents growing up as children in Europe during World War II, being partisans who were active in the Hungarian Revolution, and then coming to America as refugees. It also is very rich in natural details. And I think that's because I've spent my life as a hiker, a climber, a rider. And in fact, right now I'm working on a blog about a cross-country horse trip that I have planned for August. I am a marketing MBA, PR professional. I happen to be married to a member of Congress. I kind of understand the hard work involved in taking something public. And I understand that I need guidance from professionals to get this work and other works that I've plotted out where I think they can entertain, inform, and perhaps even inspire.
Okay. Okay. Jennie, I'm going to ask you to start.
Okay, so I hear a lot of really interesting elements here, but I'm not sure I understand the story. I understand the time, it's the Revolutionary War, and there are a couple of settings. I got the Quaker to the tobacco farm, and we have these two characters, but I don't really have an idea of how they know each other, or when they meet, or what conflict or connections, or obviously both, they have together. I don't know, again, what I'm reading to find out here. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. And I suspect that that's more about the way you've described it than maybe the actual story, but I don't know that. Hang on, I wrote a bunch of things down, so I just want to see what I wrote. I was a little bit confused when you said that your parents who were refugees from Hungary, how that, I mean, was that a model for the story? I'm not sure. It doesn't seem to be as relevant since it's such a different time, to me. So although I think I understand the refugee experiences, what inspired you to write it, and I'm always interested in that, but I'm not sure how it plays into the story here. And let's see, what else did I say? I like that you said that it was humorous and it had some spice, and that it was sort of gritty, because those elements, particularly the gritty, would really interest me. I think it's an interesting time period. I'd be wanting to know, like, what is it about that time that you're trying to tell? What story are you bringing forward from that time that's been lost to us? That this is a human example of. Hang on. That is sort of my big feedback on this. I felt like there were more details than the people in the story of the people, that needed to be heightened in your pitch.
Okay. Sam?
It's funny because I was using the book Cold Mountain as an example of a great pitch to somebody the other day, and I said, imagine if you pitched like the story of the Odyssey set during the time of this war in America, and it's the war that had the greatest number of casualties because there was people on both sides. So I didn't get that sense from your story. About the one thing that I came away with was compared to Cold Mountain, which is a male journey, that this was a female journey, and it was kind of like a coming of age during a time of war. So that kind of got me, but I got confused like Jennie did when you got into the Hungarian stuff, because I can't connect that to this, to the 1800s. It's just, I can't reconcile that in my head. And I'm also not a great scholar of American history. So I don't know much about that world. And you didn't tell me enough to make me find it compelling. So that's probably your biggest weakness, is what is it about her journey? Like, what are the stakes for her? Like, what is it that she has to do, or she's going to die? You know, how is she going to survive this? So I just wanted a little more of that. And Jennie had another really good point, which is probably something I never would have thought of, but you do want to know why we should be reading it now. Like, why is this relevant now? What is it, the story that, what is the twist or the kind of unknown element that you're bringing forward to that will resonate with us in today's culture? What is that question that you're answering? To give you an easy answer to that, I represent a Black writer, Ho Che Anderson, and he had a story that I sold quickly to address this kind of issue, where he talked about after the American Civil War, most Blacks were basically just as screwed as they were before. Like, nothing changed. So it's like people said, you're free, but no, we can't give you any work. You can't do any of that here. And so it's a story of a group of kind of folks who end up becoming gravediggers because the medical schools will buy bodies for like 10 cents a body. So, you know, you're Black, you're free theoretically, but not really. And so you're given a job where you dig up bodies and you bring them as cadavers to these medical schools, which is actually true. Like, he'd done the research and he said, this is what some people did to survive during that time. And it became a story that people were excited about. But he, you know, so part of the thing about doing this is to look to see where the stories are that haven't been told. And it goes back to this current thing about diversity, is what are these untold stories that we know happened, but because of the kind of the dominant culture that focused on their stories kind of ignored other stories that were maybe missing. And so there's a kind of moment now where we're trying to rebalance all that. So you could probably find a way to fit that in, but I can't see it from what you're saying.
Okay. Irene?
I thought this was a kind of a convoluted pitch. The opening went too fast, because as soon as you said coming of age, I thought, oh, wait a minute, is this young adult? And I couldn't remember, because in the very beginning, you said this is a 100, I didn't catch it all. To you, this is so, you're living and sleeping with this, but to us, we've never heard it before. So I would say slow down at the beginning so we get a sense of exactly what this is. But I never got a sense of what the actual plot was. And I would have liked to know that. But the thing that really got me is when you started talking about your parents and getting out of Hungary during the war, that was much more interesting to me, because the American Revolution, for one reason or another, I've never known why, but I've sold a lot of historical fiction. Back in the day, I sold historical romance. That is not a very commercial time period, I'm sorry to say. I don't know why, but it's just not. But World War II is. People can't get enough of World War II. I think what you're really trying to say here is you want to tell your parents' story, and that maybe you should be thinking about writing a family memoir, because I think that's where your passion lies.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it. So I'd like to do we only have a few minutes left, but I'd like to ask a series of questions, maybe 3 for each of you, but what I do is just have one person answer each one. So I would just move I'll go Sam, then Jennie, then Irene, and I'll ask one question of each of you and come around and do that 3 times. It'll be short answers. Okay, just to try to get a few of these other questions that people would like answered done.
Is this
So
a
I'm
lightning round? Is that what you're saying?
This is a lightning round. That's right. That's right. With no prizes at the end. So Sam, you're first up here. So what if somebody has 2 books that they've written? Should they try to pitch both of them, or should they just pitch one?
That is a great question. They should know a little bit about me and figure out the one that is most likely to get my interest. But I also think it would be fair if they said, you know, to be 100% transparent, I have 2 books. One is this and one is that. Which one would you rather hear? That's fair too, in case they because I have such a wide range. I think I might be different than these other agents in that, Jennie and Irene, in that I go from, you know, in every genre and every category, because I go for what I like. I go for a voice that I find compelling and that I want to read more of. So that, I hope that's a short answer.
That's good. That's good. Okay, Jennie, you're next. So if you're pitching one book, say a memoir, but you expect your future product to be fiction, how do you pitch for the long term?
I would recommend maybe the memoir is not the right place to start for your career. If you want to be a fiction writer, write the fiction, because if you write memoir, that tells me you want to be a memoirist.
Okay. Okay, Irene, for these short pitches, do we start with the pleasant introduction of ourselves, or do we just walk up and nod that we're the person you think we are and start pitching?
Start pitching. You wanted a short answer? That's it.
Okay. All right. And then Sam, if I have a book that's already self-published, can I pitch it to you?
I would say no as a short answer, because it gets so complicated so fast.
Okay. Jennie, if I have a book and another agent was representing it previously and they put it out to some publishers, but it never got sold, do you want to see it even though I've rewritten it entirely?
Nope.
Okay. And Irene, should I tell you that my work has been professionally edited, or do you not want to hear that?
I don't care. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
No, I don't particularly want to hear it. It's not relevant.
Okay. And then Sam, if my book is not yet written, it's not ready, but I have a pretty good idea of what it's all about, are you still interested in hearing about it?
It sounds like every cocktail party I've ever been to. The answer is no, I don't want to hear it. I want you to show me something.
Okay, Jennie, what if I come in and I tell you that, but I tell you, will you listen to it as a practice pitch? Are you interested in hearing it?
No, I'd rather talk to someone else at the cocktail party.
Okay. And all right, Irene, is it a benefit or not to tell you that I've written 3 other books that haven't been sold?
No. Why would I want to hear that?
Okay, one more round. So Sam,
Me that you, I'm sorry.
well, I wanted to tell you that I was experienced. That's what I was trying to tell you. I'm an experienced writer.
That you haven't sold anything.
Okay. Okay. Just wanted to know. So Sam, here's one that's a little bit longer. So what about a writer who's not necessarily diverse, a white woman, but has written a story with characters who are people of color or LGBTQ? So it's not own voices, but a story that promotes diversity. Are you interested in it?
You know, it's a bit of a red flag. I would say in the current climate, I would just pass, because I think it could get complicated fast.
Okay. What if the white woman is the main character and there are a lot of the other people of color and LGBTQ around her? Is that something that you're interested in?
Back to me?
Yeah. Yeah, once you finish that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I would still say it's tricky. I think it's probably, the short answer is no, but unless, I'm trying to think of how it would work. I think, like, okay, somebody presented me with this thing the other day, and this is the issue. It was a South African woman who was trying to use the name Nelson Mandela to sell a book. And I said, this is a problem. Like, you can't, unless you have somebody from the Mandela family writing this book with you, this just looks like more exploitation. You cannot do this. So you have to be very careful how you work around it. But my advice was, get a Mandela involved. If you're going to use that name, then you need somebody with that name to say, I vouch for this. I'm part of this. Let's do this together as a co-author, let's say.
Okay. Jennie, do you prefer a full hook, book, cook pitch, or do you like to hear just the hook and then you ask exploratory questions?
It depends where I am at the time. If I'm, at a cocktail party, I kind of don't want to hear a pitch at all. But I think that the most helpful way to hear a pitch is to know those things. They all work together.
Okay, so you're here and you're getting pitched in a week or so.
I'm here. I want to hear. You got to know your hook, your book, and your cook. Yes, I want to know all three of them.
Okay. And then Irene, let's see. Should I pitch one or I've got a book that's in a series, and let's say I'm on the second book, but the first one hasn't sold yet. Or should I tell you about the series? Should I just try to pitch you that middle book? How should I handle this question about a series?
Well, if it's a series, I want to know about the first book. And you can tell me it's the first of a series, but then we need to focus on the first book because that needs to get sold. And if it does well and there's interest, then we can talk about another book.
Okay.
You can't start in the middle of a series.
Okay. And then let's see, Sam, how often do you take on a book that you can't sell in the end?
I'd say I'm probably batting about, it used to be higher before the pandemic. I'd say the pandemic has slowed it down our odds. I'd say I'm batting about 65 or 70 these days. So 3 or 4 out of 10, I'll try and I got something wrong. And usually I can go back and figure out that either I rushed it or the author and I both missed something. So I'm trying to spend more time early focused on all the things that might go wrong so that we can fix them in a proposal, let's say, or the manuscript. Like I said earlier, when I started off, I want to make sure that the ending is satisfying enough that somebody's happy with the journey that they've kind of, been on with the characters. So it's made me do more editorial work than I've ever done before, but I'm trying to get back. When I first started, I was like 9 out of 10. I was like just on fire. But that was also a different time. That was in fact before the subprime crisis way back in 2007, 2008.
Okay, and Jennie, if you tell me you don't like my pitch during this conference, can I query you anyway, even if I feel like I can do a much better job with my query?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong. You can send a query, but it depends my response. My response is, I'm not interested in this area or something, then you're going to get an instant no. But if it's, I don't get it quite and you explain it more or something, maybe.
Okay. And Irene, for the last one here, let's see. Find you a good one that somebody asked here. If you have an idea about how to sell your book, so you think you know the target market and you've done general research about that niche, is it appropriate for the author to include that information in their pitch, or is that like trying to tell you how to do your business?
No, I think it's appropriate, but briefly, because again, I always come back to this, the proof is in the reading. And if there's a niche market for it or some way that you know of, I'll give you an example. I took on a proposal by a doctor who wrote a guide to weight loss surgery. And the response I got was, not enough people are having this surgery. You think the doctor can go around to different hospitals and get a guaranteed number of buys from them, like they'll each take a few thousand copies or whatever, because it's an important book and it should be there, but they need to know that it's going to sell enough copies. So if he had come to me originally and said, I've got these many hospitals lined up who are guaranteed to buy copies, that would have been very smart of him.
Mhm.
He didn't
Okay.
think of that. And
Yep, I'm going to have
Okay.
to cut you off because it is almost time for us to say goodnight. So I just want to really thank all of our wonderful panelists. We really, really appreciate Irene and Sam and Jennie that you came and did this for all of us authors that are striving to make something of our craft and of our future. So I thank all of you. I thank our three brave pitchers, Alexa and Susan and Martin, for coming out and letting us all ride on your backs to get some knowledge from it. And we thank all of you also for tuning into the conference. It really means a lot that this organization has survived the pandemic, and it means a lot to the writing community of Washington that they're here. So thank you for supporting it. Be sure to join us next Tuesday, May 4th at 7 p.m. when David O. Stewart will moderate a great panel called Paths to Publishing. And the links to the recordings of all of our panels will be emailed out. So registrants that miss it, anything you will be able to catch up on. And at the end of the conference, we're going to email a brief survey for you asking for your feedback. And we'd love to hear from you because we're looking forward to creating an in-person conference in 2022. And we hope to see all of you there and close and be able to give you real hugs. So good night, and we'll see you all again on Tuesday. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Good luck.